What would you like to see that would be sort of a best possible solution?
Yes, I can answer that very quickly. They ought to be smaller, much smaller. 200 is big enough, even for a high school. I taught in a, they say, oh, we can't offer this, we can't offer that. It's nonsense. I taught in a high school and a private school, but high school in Boston with about 100 students, and they had a far wider range of offerings and at a higher level than almost any public school. And indeed, but I don't have to pick the private sector. A woman taught in a one-room schoolhouse in New Jersey, wrote a book about it years ago called My Country School Diary, and there are very few of these giant schools who have what this woman on a tiny budget was able to offer her students. So they're too big. They ought to be 200, 150, I mean less than that. The model for the school should have been, ought to be, the family, not the factory, but it adopted the factory model and it's in love with it to this day. Teachers ought to have a kind of autonomy. Teachers ought to be the boss of their own classroom, which is to say, not just the disciplinary boss, but they ought to decide what's taught, how it's taught, what tests will be used. I mean, they ought to be the academic bosses of their own classroom. If you ask why able people are not attracted in teaching or don't stay in, that's the reason. It has very little to do with money. I've known hundreds of able people who've quit teaching, and money was never more than a very secondary reason. In fact, the people who love teaching, people who are good at it, private school teachers will teach for much less money than the schools offer. So, as a wider variety, there ought to be a huge variety of schools, and so that parents, if the parents want a school where kids wear coat and ties and sit up like little soldiers, okay, well, there's a school down the line in which they can do that. And if they want a school which is run some other way, they can do that. So if parents aren't happy with what's happening in the school, okay, we take their children out and send them to somewhere else. But the idea that huge systems can be somehow manipulated, organized to please everybody or almost everybody just leads to endless quarrels about what is to be done, what is not to be done.